Book 2. HTML and CSS. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. In this chapter, O getting the 411 on HTML and web pages. O putting HTML tags into the correct section. O integrating images and links into your page. O ensuring that your HTML is valid. Hypertext Markup Language, HTML, is the language of the web. When you go to a web page in your web browser such as Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari, the browser downloads and displays HTML. At its heart, HTML is just a document, much the same as a document you could make in a word processor. A program like Microsoft Word is used to view word processor documents because it knows how to read and display them. Likewise, when it comes to the web browser is the program that knows how to read and display documents created with HTML. Word processor documents can be created and read with a single program. On the other hand, HTML documents need different programs for creation and reading. You cannot create HTML documents with a browser. You create HTML documents using a program called an editor. This editor can be as simple as the Notepad program that comes with Microsoft Windows or as complex as Eclipse or Microsoft Visual Studio. You can typically use the same program to create HTML documents that you use to create PHP programs. This chapter describes HTML documents and shows how to build an HTML page that you can view through a web browser using the most current version, HTML5. Understanding the HTML building blocks. HTML documents being just documents, they can be stored on any computer. For instance, an HTML document can be stored in the Documents folder on your computer. However, you could be the only one who could view that HTML document on your computer. To solve that problem, web documents or pages are typically stored on a computer with more resources. 90. Understanding the HTML building blocks. Known as a web server. Storing the document on a web server enables other people to view the document. A web server is a computer that runs special software that knows how to send or serve web pages to multiple people at the same time. HTML documents are set up in a specific order, with certain parts coming before others. The core structured like this so that the web browser knows how to read and display them. When you create an HTML document, it is expected that you'll follow this structure and set up your document so the browser can read it. Document types. Web browsers can display several types of documents, not just HTML, so when creating a web document the first thing you do is tell the browser what type of document is coming. You declare the type of document with a special line of HTML at the top of the document. Web browsers can usually read documents in many formats, including HTML, XML, XHTML, SVG, and others. Each of these documents lives by different rules and is set up differently. The document type tells the browser what rules to follow when displaying the document. In technical terms, the document type is called the document type declaration, or DTD for short. In prior versions of HTML, developers needed to constantly copy and paste the document type into the document because it was both long and complicated. With the release of the latest version of HTML, called HTML5, the document type has been greatly simplified. The document type for HTML5 is doctype HTML. This will be the first line of every HTML document that you create, before anything else. Anytime you need to display HTML, you include a document type. sometimes called a doctype. You may be tempted to use doctype HTML5, but there is no version number associated with the HTML5 document type. When the next version of HTML comes out, you wanna have to go back and update all your document types to HTML6, unless, of course, they change the document type definition. Again, you may see the other, older document types in your career as an HTML developer. They include sections of an HTML document. 91. HTML 4.01 strict. 4.01//Inoco. Doctype HTML public OC_//W3C//DTD HTML. OC_//www.w3.org/tr/HTML4/strict.doco. HTML 4.01 transitional, doctype HTML public OC_//W3C//DTD HTML. 4.01 transitional //Inoco. OC_//www.w3.org/tr/HTML4/loose.doco. XHTML 1.0 strict, doctype HTML public OC_//W3C//DTD XHTML 1.0 strict //Inoco. OC_//www.w3.org/tr/XHTML1/DTD/XHTML1 strict.doco. XHTML 1.1 DTD, doctype HTML public OC_//W3C//DTD XHTML 1.1 / Inoco. OC_//www.w3.org/tr/XHTML11/DTD/XHTML11.doco. Other document types exist as well, and most of them are similarly complex and difficult to remember. If you see these document types on a web page, you'll know that the page may use slightly different syntax to create its HTML document. HTML documents are made up of letters and words enclosed in angle brackets, sometimes called less than or greater than signs. For example, Hieroko is the main element in an HTML document, also called the root element. HTML. Typically, HTML elements have both opening and closing tags. Elements are closed with a front slash in front of the element name. Seeing HTML in the document means that later on the document will have /HTML to close that element. It is said that everything in between the opening HTML and closing /HTML makes up the document and is wrapped inside of those elements. Sections of an HTML document. HTML documents use a specific structure. This structure enables the document to be read by a web browser. You'll now see the three main parts of an HTML document. Up until now you may have been thinking of HTML as creating documents. What's the difference between an HTML document and an HTML page? Nothing. The two terms are interchangeable. Sections of an HTML document. Before going into each section of the document, it'll be useful to see the whole thing, so without further delay, listing 1-to-1 shows an entire HTML document. Listing 1-to-1, a basic web page. Doctype HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first document /title. /head. Body. div my web page /div. /body. /HTML. If you view this document in a web browser, you receive a page that has a title in the browser echoes title bar or tab bar and text that states my web page. Later sections in the chapter explain how to enhance this page with more HTML elements and more text. The root element. Though not a section of an HTML document, the root element is what wraps around the entire document, appearing as the first thing after the doc type and the last thing in the document. The root element is opened with HTML. The root element is closed with /HTML. The head section and title element. The head section of a document contains information about the document itself. The head section is opened with head. The head section is closed with /head. Figure 1:1. The title element shows up in the tab or title bar of the web. The head section should not be confused with the header or menu on a page itself. The head section is a behind-the-scenes element of a page. The head section can contain a lot of information about the page. This information includes things like the title of the page, the language of the page, English, Spanish, French, Swedish, and so on, whether the page contains style information or additional helper programs, and other such things common to the page. These descriptive elements in the head section are sometimes called meta elements because they occur common to the entire page or describe the page itself. You should always have a title element inside the head section. The title element is what shows up in the title bar of the web browser or as the title of the tab in the web browser, shown in figure 1:1. What makes a good title element? Title elements should be descriptive of the page contents but not overly so. Frequently, a title tag may have the site name along with something descriptive about the page itself. For example, www.brayingia.org has OC_Steve. Suering Oko official site and blog Oko and then navigating to a given page, say the books page, results in the title changing to OC_Books Steve. Suering Oko official site and blog Oko, the title is therefore both descriptive of the page as well as the site. Page titles are used by search engines like Google as one factor to help determine whether your page is relevant, therefore placing it higher in the search results. Google, for example, displays up to 66 characters of the title tag. So, keeping the title short but sweet is key. Creating good HTML. The body section. The body section is the heart of a web page. It echoes where you place all the text and images for the page. Essentially everything that you see when you view a page, with the exception of the title, is found within the body section. The body section opens with body. The body section closes with /body. Just like the head section can contain other elements like the title and meta information, the body section can contain several HTML elements as well. For example, inside the body section you find all the link and image elements, along with paragraphs, tables, and whatever else is necessary to display the page. Later in this chapter, you see how to add links and images to a page. Next, you learn about the basic page elements found on a web page. Creating good HTML. A good web page is structured in a logical order. This means that you place elements in a certain order so that they can be read properly by a web browser and that any time you open an element you also close that element using the corresponding tag that includes angle brackets and a forward slash. Doing so ensures that the page will display like you want it to when viewed in any web browser. Later in this chapter, you see how to check your HTML document to make sure it echoes structured correctly, but here we tell you how to choose the appropriate elements for your needs. Using the appropriate elements. Web pages frequently use several page elements, sometimes called tags. Table 1-to-1 describes some of these elements. Table 1-to-1. Common HTML elements. Element. Description. Typical use. A. Anchor. Creates a link to another page or a section of the same document. BR. Line break. Enters a line break or return character. Element. Description. Typical use. Div. A section of a page. Creates overall areas or logical divisions on a page, such as a heading/menu section, a content area, or a footer. Form. Web form. Creates a web form to accept user input. Covered in Chapter 3 of this mini-book. H1 through H6. Heading. Creates a container for a heading, such as heading text. HR. Hard rule. Creates a horizontal line. IMG. Image. A container for an image. Input. Input. An element to accept user input. Covered in Chapter 3 of this mini-book. Link. Resource link. Links to a resource for the page, not to be confused with an anchor element. P. A paragraph in a page. Creates textual paragraphs or other areas and containers for text. Script. A script tag. Denotes a web script or program. Also frequently found in the head section. Span. Span. Creates a container for an element. Frequently used in conjunction with styling. Information. Related to the structure or layout of the elements is a concept called semantic markup, which is a fancy term to say that you always use the right element at the right time. In other words, you use the right kind of element to hold text and the right kind of element to add line breaks to a page. Consider these benefits of semantic markup. O-Pound improves search results. A primary benefit of semantic markup is that visitors and search engines alike can find the information they need. O-Pound simplifies maintenance. A secondary benefit to semantic markup is that it makes maintenance easier later on. When a page is both semantically correct and valid HTML, it is said to be well-formed. Putting text on a page. There are many ways to insert text into a web page and many elements that are appropriate for holding text. Heading elements such as H1, H2 through H6 are the correct place to put headings, while P, span, and div are appropriate containers for longer form text, such as creating good HTML. Paragraphs. Listing 1-to-2 shows a simple web page with 2 headings and some paragraphs. Listing 1-to-2, a web page with headings and paragraphs. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first document /title. /head. Body. H1 my web page /H1. P welcome to my web page. Here you'll find all sorts of information about me /P. H2 my books /H2. P you can find information on my books here as well /P. /body. /HTML. When viewed in a web browser, this page appears like figure 1-to-2. Figure 1-to-2. A simple web page with headings. And as you can see from figure 1-to-2, the information on the page includes an H1 element, followed by a paragraph, P. When the paragraph is closed with /P, another heading element, this time an H2, is found. When the second heading is closed, /H2, another paragraph is found. It would have also been possible to substitute div elements in place of the paragraph elements on the page. Creating your first page. Enough of us showing you HTML, Idako's time for you to build a page. You can create HTML with any text editor. In fact, it often is better to use a plain text editor rather than an expensive HTML creation tool. Idako's important to note that you should use a text editor and not a word processor like Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word or a similar program like Pages on a Mac add all sorts of extra formatting information that get in the way of creating good HTML, even in their Save as HTML option. Therefore, on Windows, use a program like Notepad. Even the Windows program WordPad can place extra formatting information in it. When it comes to an HTML editor, the simpler the better. The text editor included with Linux depends on the distribution of Linux. Yukari using one of your humble book authors ago, that would be Steve. Personal preference is for the command line editor call 6 or Vim, a more graphical experience is typically found with a program called gedit Oko, the default text editor for Ubuntu. Mac includes a program called TextEdit that can be used for creating plain text documents Oko, but be careful, the TextEdit program will attempt to save files in rich text format, RTF, by default. When creating or saving files with TextEdit, select plain text from the file format drop-down menu. This chapter focuses on the basics. Don't worry that your web page doesn't look stylish. The next chapter explains how to style your page with cascading style sheets, or CSS. Follow these steps to create your page. 1. Open your text editor. See the preceding discussion about text editors. You want a text editor that allows plain text without extra information. 2. In the text editor, enter the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first web page / title. / head. Body. H1 my web page / H1. P hello world, welcome to my website / P. / body. / HTML. Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. 3. Save the file as firstpage.html. Save the file exactly as named, using lowercase throughout the name. Later in the chapter, you can practice validating this file. Figure 1-3. Your first page viewed through a Apache, the web server used to send the files to your browser, is case sensitive for file names, so sticking with lowercase will save you lots of headaches. Make sure the extension is .html and not .text or another extension. Save the file to your document root, which is discussed in Book I. The document root location depends on how you've installed Apache and on what type of system you're using. If you're using a hosting provider, then this is the point where you upload the file to their system. 4. Open your web browser to load the page. In the web browser, point to http://localhost/firstpage.html. When you do so, you'll see a page like figure 1-3. Choosing block level or inline elements. When you're considering which type of element to add to your page, think about whether you'd like it to extend across the width of the page. Pound block level elements, both div and p elements are known as block level elements. A block level element displays across the entire width of the page, nothing can appear next to or alongside a block level element. Essentially, think of block level elements as having a carriage return after them. Pound inline elements, certain elements, primarily the span element, are considered inline elements, which means that other elements can appear next to them. In other words, inline elements don't have a carriage return after them. Inserting line breaks and spaces. There are times when you create a page and want to insert a line break. To accomplish this action in a word processor, you simply press the Enter or Return key on the keyboard. Things are not so simple in HTML. No matter how many times you press Enter in an HTML document, the text will still display on the same line in the web browser. Consider the code in listing 1 to 3. It echoes the same HTML as listing 1 to 2, but has 5 extra carriage returns inserted. Listing 1 to 3, trying to insert carriage returns into HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first document / title. / head. Body. H1 my web page / H1. P welcome to my web page. Here you'll find all sorts of information about me / P. H2 my books / H2. P you can find information on my books here as well / P. / body. / HTML. When viewed through a web browser, the output is the same as figure 1 to 2. Earlier in the chapter, you see no blank lines between the first paragraph and the second heading. The same thing happens to extra spaces in HTML. No matter how many times you press the spacebar on the keyboard in a web document, the most you'll ever get is a single space. We tell you more about how to add spaces at the end of this section. The BR tag is used to insert line breaks into web pages. Look at the code. In listing 1 to 4, instead of using the Enter key, or return on a Mac, the BR tag is used to add carriage returns. Listing 1 to 4, using BR for line breaks. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. Title my first document / title. / head. Body. H1 my web page / H1. P welcome to my web page. Here you'll find all sorts of information about me / P. BR. 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 H2 my books / H2. P you can find information on my books here as well / P. / body. / HTML. When viewed in a browser, the desired effect is shown, as illustrated in Figure 1 to 4. Figure 1 to 4. Using BR to insert carriage. You'll sometimes see an extra / in some tags like BR, so the O call be written as BR /. This is a holdover from XHTML but is not necessary for HTML5. While we're on the subject, you'll also notice that BR doesn't have a closing partner, like a /BR. That echoes OK. You can use BR as is, without worrying about having to close it. Adding spaces to HTML is accomplished with the end NBSP entity, sometimes written as end #160. However, there are better ways to accomplish spacing. Creating good HTML 101. In HTML, chiefly through the use of cascading style sheets, CSS. Therefore, the use of the end NBSP entity cannot be covered in favor of the more common and more widely supported method through CSS OCO, the topic in Chapter 2 of this mini book. Making your document easier to maintain. Developers frequently use comments to note behind-the-scenes information about the page or about their code, and comments don't display on the web page. For example, a comment in a web page might be something like, OC_ I added this on 10/19/2012 OCO, or OC_ added in support of our sales initiative OCO. If you visit the web page, you can see those comments only by looking at the Pagioco's HTML file. HTML comments are opened with the syntax. HTML comments are closed with the syntax --. Everything that appears from the beginning, dash to the first dash is considered part of the comment. Listing 1 to 5 contains an example HTML document with a comment. Listing 1 to 5, adding an HTML comment. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first document / title. / head. Body. H1 my web page / H1. P welcome to my web page. Here you'll find all sorts of information about me / P. Dash adding information about my books October 1st, 2012 dash. H2 my books / H2. P you can find information on my books here as well / P. / body. / HTML. HTML comments are visible by the world and should never be used to store any information considered privileged or private. Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. HTML comments can span multiple lines, as in the example in listing 1 to 6. Listing 1 to 6, a multi-line comment. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first document / title. / head. Body. H1 my web page / H1. P welcome to my web page. Here you'll find all sorts of information about me / P. Dash. Adding information about my books. Date, October 1st, 2012 dash. H2 my books / H2. P you can find information on my books here as well / P. / body. / HTML. In this comment, you can see that the actual text of the comment is indented, which brings up another important point. Idaco's helpful to use indentation when creating documents. Documents are easier to read and maintain later when elements are indented, so that way you can clearly see visually which elements are found inside Idaco of which other elements. Adding lists and tables. Lists and tables help to represent certain types of information. For example, a list of trees in Stevioco's yard is best represented with a list like this: pine, oak, elm. But if he wants to include more information about the trees, a table is a better format. Tree type: pine, oak, elm. Description: a common tree in my yard. There are a few oaks in my yard. I have one elm in my yard, but Idaco's too close to the house. Creating good HTML 103. HTML has tags to create both lists and tables. Table 1 to 2 describes a variety of such elements. Table 1 to 2. Common list and table elements in HTML. Element. Type. Description. List item. Used in conjunction with ol or ol to create lists of information. Ol. Order list. An ordered list of information, used in conjunction with table. Table. Used with tr, td, and other elements. To create a table for presenting information. Td. Table cell. Creates a cell in a table row. Th. Table header. A table cell that echoes a heading. Tr. Table row. Creates a row of a table. Ol. Unordered list. Related to ol and li to create lists of information. When building a list, you have two choices of the type of list to create: an ordered list or an unordered list. Ordered lists are used for things like making an outline, while unordered lists make up pretty much every other kind of list. Listing 1 to 7 shows the HTML used to create a standard unordered list. Listing 1 to 7, creating an unordered list. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title and unordered list slash title. Slash head. Body. ul. Lee pine slash Lee. Lee oak slash Lee. Lee elm slash Lee. Slash ul. Slash body. Slash HTML. Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. When viewed in a browser, this HTML results in a page like that in Figure 1 to 5. Figure 1 to 5. N. Unordered. The unordered list created in listing 1 to 7 uses the default styling for the list, which adds bullets next to each item. You can also change the style of this bullet or not include one at all using CSS. You learn more about CSS in the next chapter. Creating an ordered list means simply changing the ul element to ol. Doing so looks like this. ol. Lee pine slash Lee. Lee oak slash Lee. Lee elm slash Lee. Slash ol. When viewed in a browser, the bullets from the preceding example are replaced with numbers, as in Figure 1 to 6. Other types of lists, such as definition lists, exist but are not covered here. Practicing creating a table. 105. Figure 1 to 6. And ordered. Practicing creating a table. Idako's time to create a page with a table. Follow these steps. 1. Open your text editor. See the preceding exercise for more information on text editors. 2. In the text editor, create a new text document. Most text editors will open with a blank or empty document to begin with. If you have anything in the document, clear it out before continuing. 3. Enter the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first web page slash title. Slash head. Body. H1 my table slash H1. Table. TR. TH airport code slash TH. TH common name slash city slash TH. Slash TR. Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. 106. Practicing creating a table. TR. TDCWA slash TD. TD Central Wisconsin Airport slash TD. Slash TR. TR. TD Ord slash TD. TD Chicago Oakahar slash TD. Slash TR. TR. TD LHR slash TD. TD London Heathrow slash TD. Slash TR. Slash table. Slash body. Slash HTML. 4. Save the file as table.html. Save the file, as you did for the preceding exercise, with a .html extension. The file should be saved in your document root. Refer to the preceding exercise or book I for more information on finding your document root if you have not already found it for that exercise. 5. View the file in your browser. Open your web browser and type http://localhost/table.html into the address bar. Doing so will show a page like the one in Figure 1 to 7. Figure 1 to 7. The table you created. For this, practicing creating a table. 107. Notice that the table doesn't have any borders around it. If you'd like to add borders, keep working through this exercise. Otherwise, continue to the next section. 6. Open table.html in your text editor. If you closed your text editor, open it again and load table.html. 7. Change the code in table.html to the following. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title my first web page slash title. Slash head. Body. H1 my table slash H1. Table border equals OCO1 OCO. TH airport code / TH common name / city / TH /TR TDCWA /TD TD Central Wisconsin Airport /TD /TR TD Ord /TD TD Chicago Oakahar /TD TR TD LHR /TD TD London Heathrow /TD /TR /table /body /HTML. Note that the only change is to add a space and then border equals OCO1 OCO. Within the table element. 8. Reload table.html in your browser. If you closed your browser, reopen it and go to http://localhost. Table.html. If your browser is still open, press Ctrl+R to refresh the page, Command+R on a Mac. You now see a border around the table, as in Figure 1-8, including links and images on your web page. Figure 1-8. A table with borders around each. This is a rather primitive way to add a border to a table. A better way to accomplish this task is by using CSS, which you learned about briefly in Book I. Chapter 2 of this mini-book covers CSS in much more detail. 2. When you added border equals OCO1 OCO to the table element, you added something called an attribute. An attribute helps to further describe or define the element or provides additional details about how that element should behave, including links and images on your web page. What would the web be without links, OCO, and images too? Not much of web at all. Links are the items that you click on inside of web pages to connect to or load other pages, and when we talk about images, we mean both illustrations and photos. This section looks at how to add links and also images to your web page. Adding links. Links are added with the a, or anchor element. The href attribute tells the anchor element the destination for the link. The destination can be just about anything, from another web page on the same site, to a different site, to a document or file, to another location within the same web page. The link itself can be added to just about anything on the page. For example, you might link each of the trees mentioned in the previous section to articles about each of those types of trees. When something is linked, the browser typically gives visual feedback that there echoes a link by highlighting and underlining the linked area. You can see including links and images on your web page 109. Example of this shortly. Like other HTML elements, the a element has a corresponding closing /a tag that is used to tell the browser when to stop highlighting and underlining the link. Linking to other pages. Linking to other pages, whether on the same site or at a different site, is accomplished in the same way. For example, look at the following HTML. P here echoes a link to a href equals ocode://www.braingia.argo Steve Sueringako site /a/p. This line uses a paragraph element p to create a sentence. OC pound here echoes a link to Steve Sueringako site OCO. This being the web, you decide to actually provide a link so that visitors can click on certain words and be transported to that page. You do so with the a element along with the href attribute. In this case, the a element looks like this. A href equals ocode://www.braingia.argoco. The href attribute points to the URL http://www.braingia.org and is enclosed in quotation marks. The text that will be highlighted then appears, followed by the closing /a tag. Here echoes an exercise for implementing this link. 1. Open your text editor. You use your text editor to create a new file, so there should be nothing in the text editor except a blank document or file. 2. In the text editor, place the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title link / title. / head. Body. P Hirio cos a link to a href equals o code : / www.braindia. Argo co Steve Suering gako site / a / p. / body. / html. 3. Save the file as link.html. The file should be saved to your document root with the name link.html. 4. Open your browser and view the page. Open your web browser and point to http://localhost / link.html. By entering that URL into the address bar, you'll see a page like that including links and images on your web page. Figure 1-9. A page with always close A elements with a corresponding closing /A tag. A frequent mistake is to leave the A element open, resulting in all the text that follows to be highlighted as a link. The example and exercise show how to link to a page on a different website. Creating a link to a page on the same site is accomplished in the same manner, but rather than including the Uniform Resource Identifier, URI scheme and the host name, the http://www.braingia.org part from this example, you can just link to the page itself. If you've been following along with previous exercises, then you should have a page called table.html. Hirio cos HTML to create a link to table.html. The preceding exercise cos HTML is included so that you can see the overall context for the link. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title link / title. / head. Body. P a link to a href equals ocodable.loco the table example / a / p. / body. / HTML. Like before, the link is contained within a p element, but note the href attribute now points merely to table.html. Avoid spaces in file names and in web URLs in general. Spaces are generally not friendly to URLs, in file names, or in images. Though they can be worked around, you'll have much more success if you always simply avoid spaces when naming things for the web, including links and images on your web page. 111. Understanding absolute versus relative links. The link shown in the preceding example is called a relative link because it does not begin with either the Uniform Resource Identifier, URI, scheme, http:// or a beginning front / A relative link assumes that the target, table.html in the example, is in the same directory or folder as the document or page from which it is linked. In the case of the example, a relative link works because the current page, link.html, and the page being linked, table.html, both exist in the document root. In the document root, then you would need to create an absolute link. An absolute link tells the server exactly where to look to find the target. For example, an absolute link might look like /table/table.html. This link tells the server that it needs to begin looking in its document root for a directory called tables, and that it should then find a file called tables.html in the tables directory. If both pages were not in the same directory, in other words, if table.html was in a folder called tables in the document root and the link.html file was in a folder called links, use absolute links when you need to provide exact or absolute references to the target being linked. Use relative links when the resource being linked will always be found in the same place relative to the page linking to it. If the location of the page or the target changes, then relative links will stop working. Linking within a page. Sometimes you want to link within the same page. You might do this on a particularly long page, where you have a table of contents at the top and then the full article lower down in the page. Creating within-page links uses the same A element that you've seen, this time with the name attribute. Listing 1 to 8 shows HTML to create a within-page anchor. Listing 1 to 8, an in-page anchor. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title link / title. / head. Body. ul. Leahref equals oko hashtag pineaco pine / a / lee. Leahref equals oko hashtag okoko oak / a / lee. Leahref equals oko hashtag elmoko elm / a / lee. Including links and images on your web page. /ul. Pia name equals oko pineaco pine trees are abundant in my yard /ap. Pia name equals oko akoko there are a few oak trees in my yard /ap. Pia name equals osital mako there occurs one elm in my yard /ap. /body. /html. In listing 1 to 8, the href tags added to each of the list items use a pound or #, hashtag. This is the key used to tell the browser that the resource will be found on the same page. Then later on in the HTML you see another A element, this time using the name attribute. That name attribute corresponds to each of the href attributes from earlier in the page. That echoes it. There echoes nothing more to adding in page links. You merely need to use the pound sign to indicate that the resource is found later on the page. And then use the name attribute to make another element match that. Opening links in a new window. Sometimes you want to make a link open in a new tab or a new window. When a visitor clicks a link that echoes defined in such a way, the browser will open a new tab and load the linked resource in that new tab. The existing site will still be open in the visitor echoes browser, too. Don't make every link open in a new window. You should do so only where it makes sense, as might be the case where a visitor is in the middle of a long process on your website and needs to link to reference another resource or site, like a directory of zip codes or a terms of service agreement. Also, whether the link opens in a new tab or a new window is dependent on the browser. You cannot control it. This can be done by adding the target attribute to your A element with a special value, _blank. For example, an earlier example showed how to create a link to Stevioco's website, www.braingia.org. Recall that the link looked like this. A href equals ocode : www.braingia.org Steve Suering Gako site /a. To make this link open in a new window, you add the target equals oko _blancaco. Attribute / value pair to the element, so it looks like this. A href equals ocode : www.braingia.org oko target equals oko _blancaco Steve Suering Gako site /a. You can try this out by opening the link.html file from the earlier exercise and adding target equals oko _blancaco as shown. Note the use of the underscore preceding the word blank. When you save the file and reload that page, Ctrl+R or Command+R, the link won't look any different. However, clicking the link will open a new tab, or new window, depending on your browser and configuration, including links and images on your web page 113. Adding images. Images, such as photos or graphics, enhance the visual appeal of a web page. Images are usually embedded in a page, such as shown in figure 1 to 10. where a photo of the cover of another of Stevie Oko's books, MySQL Bible, John Wiley and Sons Incorporated, is shown. Figure 1 to 10. An image on a web page. You can include images from anywhere, assuming that you have the legal rights to do so. In other words, you can store the image on your web server. Or you can include an image stored on someone else's web server. But we repeat, first, make sure you don't violate any copyright. There is also another, special type of image, called a background image. Background images provide the background for the page itself. Chapter 2 of this mini-book covers background images. Referencing the image location. Images are added with the img element. Just as with the A element, the img element uses an attribute to tell the browser more information about itself. The src attribute is used to tell the browser where to find the image. Earlier, in figure 1 to 10, you see an image of a book cover. The HTML to bring that image into the page looks like this. img src equals okoimages/books_misclebible.gifoko. As you can see, the img element adds the src attribute, which then references where to find the image on the web server. 114. Including links and images on your web page. You might notice that the img element doesn't have a closing /img tag. That occurs because this element doesn't have its own content, unlike the P and A elements which both need content to go within them and therefore need to be closed. You may sometimes see an element like img closed with / instead of just, as in the example. Both are acceptable and valid ways to close this type of element. The img element should always have an alt attribute. The alt attribute tells search engines and assistive technologies about the image being used. When used with an img element, the alt attribute looks like this. img src equals okoimages/books_misclebible.gifoko alt equals okomisclebiblioko. You should use a short description as the contents of the alt attribute. Using something like MySQL Bible was a great book and everyone should purchased Oniako doesn't describe the image, but MySQL Biblioko does. Choosing good web images. When choosing an image for the web you need to look at more than just making sure no one blinked when the photo was taken. You should also consider the image IOCO's height and width, the size of the file, and its format. Web browsers can view images formatted in numerous formats, including JPG, GIF, and PNG, as well as several others. The height and width of the image are up to you and depend on the needs of your page. For example, Steve needed a special sized file in order to display the MySQL Bible book cover. He used image manipulation software in order to resize the image for his needs. Many image manipulation and image processing software programs are available. Adobe Photoshop and GIMP are among the most popular ones. File size is arguably one of the most important aspects for your consideration when choosing an image. When you include large images, such as those taken at the high-quality setting with your digital camera, visitors have to download the file, which can take an extraordinarily long time depending on the speed of the visitor's connection. If they are visiting from a dial-up modem or slower connection, then an image that occurs 4 megabytes, MB, may take 20 minutes to load. This is also true with Tudeoko's mobile devices, on which the speeds may be slower and a visitor using such a device may have to pay data download fees. To get around this, you can resize your images using the aforementioned software. Resizing images to under 100 kilobytes, KB, is important. Another Important aspect to consider is the sum of all images on the page. For example, if you have 15 images at 100 KB each, then Yukari requiring the visitor to download 1.5 megabytes worth of images OCO, which is likely too much for many visitors. If the page seems slow to load, they may go elsewhere rather than wait. Including links and images on your web page 115. When Yukari choosing an image format, know that if you choose one of the 3 formats mentioned earlier, JPG, GIF, and PNG, you ensure that the widest possible audience can view the image without needing special software to do so. Keep the sum of all images in mind when sizing the images for your page so that the page downloads faster for the visitor. Creating a page with an image. IDECO's time to create a page with an image so that you can see how and where an image fits within the larger whole of an HTML page. Follow these steps. 1. Open your text editor. See the previous discussion about text editors. 2. In the text editor, enter the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a snowy picture / title. / head. Body. H1 a snowy picture / H1. PIMG SRC equals OCO snow.jape GACO alt equals O Sirly November snow OCO / P. / body. / HTML. When you create this HTML, you need to use a photo or other picture of your own, or you can use the snow.jpg file included in the companion content of this book. Regardless of the picture you choose, you need to place the file in the document root of the web server, discussed in book I. Also, make sure that case, uppercase and lowercase, for the file name matches what you put in the src attribute. In other words, if your picture is called thekids.jpg, then the src attribute should be oc_thekids.jape-gaco. 3. Save the file as image.html. Save the file exactly as named, using lowercase throughout the name. The file should be saved to your document root, which is discussed in Book I. The document root location depends on how you've installed Apache and on what type of system you're using. If you're using a hosting provider, then this is the point where you upload the file to that host provider ecosystem. 4. Open your web browser to load the page. In the web browser, point to http://localhost/image.html. When you do so, you'll see a page like Figure 1 to 11. Writing valid HTML. Figure 1 to 11. Adding an image to a. This HTML used an img element to load a photo called snow.jpg from the current directory. In other words, snow.jpg was in the same directory as the image.html page on the web server. Avoid spaces in image file names, just as you would for regular files and other URLs. Remember also that URLs, files, and images are case sensitive. Writing valid HTML. When you create a web page with HTML, there are certain rules to follow in order to make sure that web browsers can read and display the page correctly. HTML and its rules are discussed in the first mini-book included in this guide. The current version of the HTML specification is HTML version 5, known simply as HTML5. The process of validating a page means that a specialized website examines the HTML code that you write and compares it to the specification for that version of HTML. In the case of the HTML that you're writing for this book, you are using HTML5. The website used to validate HTML is called the W3C Markup Validation Service, frequently called the W3C Validator, and is operated by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. The W3C validator is found at http:// validator.w3.org and is free to use. Figure 1 to 12 shows the W3C validator. Validating your HTML 117. Figure 1 to 12. The W3C. Markup. Validation. Service. Sometimes. Simply. Called the. Validate your HTML in one of three ways. Providing a URL, you can enter a URL into the validator and it will automatically retrieve the HTML at that URL and attempt to validate it. In order for the validator to retrieve your HTML using this method, the page needs to be available to the public. This is usually not the case. When you've installed a web server on your computer, as discussed in this book, if you're using an external hosting provider, then your site and pages may be available to the internet. In that case, you can enter the URL in the OC_validate by Uriaco address box. Uploading a file, you can upload a file using the OC_validate by file upload OCO option. Using this method, you choose a file on your computer. That file is then uploaded to the validator. Pasting HTML into the validator, this means copying the HTML from your text editor and pasting it into the OC_validate by direct input OCO tab in the validator. This option is typically the fastest and easiest method and IDOCO's the one that we show in this section. Validating your HTML. If you've followed the exercises in this chapter, then you've built some HTML. The next exercise uses the W3C validator to make sure that the HTML you've written is valid according to the HTML5 specification. Follow these steps. Validating your HTML. This page was the first one you created in this chapter. However, if you skip that exercise, open any one of the HTML files that you created in this chapter. To highlight/select all the HTML in the open file. Use your mouse or pointing device to highlight all the HTML or press Ctrl+A on Windows or Command+A on Mac. 3. Copy the HTML to your clipboard. Select Copy, found in the Edit menu in most text editors, or press Ctrl+C on Windows or Command+C on Mac to copy the highlighted HTML to the clipboard. 4. Open your web browser and navigate to the W3C validator. With the browser open, type http://validator.w3.org in the address or location bar in the browser and press Enter to go to the validator. 5. Select Validate by Direct Input. The Validate by Direct Input tab will be used to paste in the code in your clipboard. 6. Paste the HTML into the validator. Press Ctrl+V on Windows or Command+V on Mac to paste the HTML from the clipboard into the Enter the Markup to Validate box on the validator page. If you're using the HTML from firstpage.html, your screen should look similar to that in Figure 1 to 13. 7. Click Check. Click the check button on the validator page to run the validation of your HTML. You should receive a page similar to that in Figure 1 to 14. Figure 1 to 13. Pasting HTML into the Book 2. Chapter 1. Creating a basic page with HTML. Validating your HTML 119. Figure 1 to 14. A valid HTML document passed through the validator. Notice the 3 warnings in this validation. Scrolling down reveals that one of the warnings is that the HTML5 validator is actually experimental at this time, though that may change by the time you read this. The other 2 warnings are related to language settings. IDOCO's good practice to include the character encoding, which helps the browser determine how to read the document, including what LAN Gauge is used for the HTML and the page. See http://www.w3.org. International/tutorial/tutorial charin/hashtag slide 02504. More information on character encoding. Chapter 2, Adding Style with CSS. In this chapter, Opoundo finding out what styling the page means. Opoundo exploring different methods of using CSS. Opoundo selecting certain elements for styling. Opoundo changing fonts and adding borders. Opoundo adding list styles. Opoundo modifying backgrounds. Opoundo working with layout. Opoundo adding a header and footer. And the preceding chapters, you learn a little about a lot and a lot about a few things. Namely, you learn how to install a web server and a database system, and you learn a little about HTML. Although HTML is used to add text to a page, that text is pretty boring, it needs some style. Enter CSS. In this chapter, you learn what cascading style sheets, CSS, is and how to use it for various layout and style purposes. We recommend that you work through the chapter from beginning to end, because some exercises build on previous exercises. Discovering what CSS can and cannot do for your web page. This section looks at CSS from a high level to give you a foundation on which you'll learn how to use CSS on your website. What is CSS? CSS complements HTML by providing a look and feel to web pages. The HTML pages you created in the preceding chapter looked fairly plain, with a default font and font size. Using CSS, you can spice up that look, adding color and background images, changing fonts and font sizes, drawing borders around areas, and even changing the layout of the page itself. 122. Discovering what CSS can and cannot do for your web page. CSS has its own language, separate from HTML, but you would not use CSS without the HTML page. In other words, although HTML can stand on its own and present a page to a browser, CSS cannot. You would not write a CSS page. Rather, you write HTML and then use CSS to help style that page to get it to look like you want it to. Like HTML, CSS is defined by specifications, with the latest being CSS version 3, known as CSS 3. Why use CSS? Before CSS, an HTML developer changed fonts and colors by changing attributes on each element. If the developer wanted all the headings to look a certain way, he had to change each of those headings. Imagine doing this on a page with 10 headings, and then imagine doing it on 50 pages. The task quickly becomes tedious. And then think of what happens when the site owner decides she wants all the headings changed back to the original way. CSS alleviates this burden of individually updating elements and makes it so that you can apply one single style across one or more elements. You can apply multiple styles to the same element, and you can target a certain style down to the individual element. For example, if you want all headings to be bold font but a certain heading should have italic, you can do that with CSS. Use CSS to make changes to the layout, look, and feel of a web page. CSS makes managing these changes easy. Limitations of CSS. CSS is no code without limitations. The primary limitation of CSS is that not all web browsers support CSS in exactly the same way. One browser might interpret your layout in a slightly different manner, placing items higher or lower or in a different place entirely. Also, older browsers do not support newer versions of CSS, specifically the CSS 3 specification. This means that those browsers cannot use some of the features of the CSS3 specification. To get around this, you can use older versions of the specification that are more widely supported by those older browsers. The key when using CSS and, as you see later, when using JavaScript, is to test across multiple browsers. Web browsers such as Firefox, Chrome, and Safari are all free downloads, and Microsoft offers software called the Virtual PC for application compatibility, which are free, time-limited versions of Windows that include older versions of Internet Explorer. You can run them inside of Microsoft Echo's free virtual PC emulation software. By testing in other browsers, you can see how the site will look in those browsers and correct layout issues prior to deploying the site to the Internet. Connecting CSS to a page 123. Always test your pages in multiple browsers to ensure that they look and act like you intended. Connecting CSS to a page. You can add CSS to a page in a few different ways. Opound directly to an HTML element. Opound with an internal style sheet. Opound with an external style sheet. The most reusable way to add CSS to a page is by using an external style sheet, but the simplest is to add styling information directly on an element. We show each of these methods. Adding styling to an HTML element. You add style to just about any HTML element with the style attribute, as in this example that makes all the text in the first paragraph into bold font. P style equals OK font weight, bold, OK. All of this text will be bold/P. When viewed in a browser, the text is bold, as shown in Figure 2:1. Figure 2:1. Bold text. Styled. In Figure 2:1, the paragraph with bold text appears above a normal paragraph. That normal paragraph does not use CSS for styling. Connecting CSS to a page. When a style is applied within an HTML element, it is called an inline style or inline CSS. Here is an example that you can try. You build some HTML first and then begin to add styling to it. 1. Open your text editor. Create a new blank file. See Chapter 1 of this mini book for more information on text editors and creating a new text document. 2. Within the blank text document, place the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. /head. Body. div. This is my web page /div. div. This is the span nicest /span page IOCO made yet. /div. div. Here is some text on my page /div. /body. /html. 3. Save the file as css.html. Within the text editor, save the file using the name css.html, making sure there are no spaces or other characters in the file name. The file should be saved within your document root. 4. Open your web browser and view the page. Within the web browser echo's address bar, type http://localhost/css.html. And you'll see a page similar to that shown in Figure 2:2. 5. Close the browser. Now that you've verified that the page is working, close the browser. 6. Switch to the text editor to edit the HTML. Within the text editor, edit the HTML from step 2 to add CSS. If you closed the file, reopen it in your text editor. Connecting CSS to a page 125. Figure 2:2. Creating a simple web. 7. Change the HTML to add 2 different style attributes, as shown here. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. /head. Body. div style equals OK font weight, bold, OK this is my web page slash. Div. Div. This is the span style equals OK font style. Italic, OK nicest slash span page I OK made yet. Slash div. Div style equals OK font weight, bold, OK here is some text on my page slash div. Slash body. Slash html. 8 Save the file. You can save it as css.html or save it as css2.html if you don't want to overwrite your original css.html file. The file should be saved in your document root. 9 Open your web browser and view the page. Typing in http://localhost/css.html, or css2.html if you saved it as css2. HTML, reveals the file, now with inline styles applied to 2 areas. This is illustrated in Figure 2-3. Figure 2-3. Adding inline styles to the. This exercise created an HTML file that used both div and span elements. The HTML was then styled using inline styles. The inline styles adjusted both the font weight and the font style to create bold text for 2 elements and italic text for 1 element. When used with CSS, font weight and font style are known as properties. These properties are then given values, such as bold and italic. When you see terminology that a CSS property was changed, you know that the property is the name and that the value is what to change that property to. Using an internal style sheet. Applying styles to individual elements quickly becomes cumbersome when you have a large web page. As you see in the preceding exercise, in order to make the text of the 2 div elements bold, you needed to add a style attribute to each of the div elements. Luckily, there occurs a better way. You can create a special area of the web page to store styling information. This styling information is then applied to the appropriate elements within the HTML. This alleviates the need to add a style attribute to each element. Connecting CSS to a page 127. You add internal styles within the head portion of a web page using the style element. Listing 2-1 shows HTML with a style element. Listing 2-1, using an internal style sheet. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. Style type equals OK text /XOCO. Div. Font weight, bold. Span. Font style, italic. /style. /head. Body. Div. This is my web page /div. Div. This is the span nicest /span page I OK made yet. /div. Div. Here is some text on my page /div. /body. /html. The page adds an internal style sheet to add a bold font to div elements, and an italic styled font to all span elements in the page. Style type equals OK text /XOCO. Div. Font weight, bold. Span. Font style, italic. /style. The style element uses a type attribute to tell the browser what type of styling information to expect. In this case, query using text /CSS type. Styling. Notice also the closing tag, which is required. Connecting CSS to a page. When this page is viewed in a browser, it displays like that in Figure 2-4. Figure 2-4. Using an internal. Look closely at Figure 2-4, notice the slight difference with the display from Figure 2-3. In Figure 2-3, the second line, OC pound this is the nicest page I OK made. Yet OK is not bold, but the line appears in a bold font in figure 2 to 4. This difference is present because the internal style sheet targets all div elements in the page rather than just the specific ones that were changed, with the inline style method shown earlier. The next section, OC targeting. Styles OCO shows how to fix this. Using an external style sheet. You've seen how inline styles, adding styling information to each element individually, can become tedious. You then saw how to use an internal style sheet to create styling information for the page as a whole. But what happens when you have 10 pages or 100 pages, all needing styling? You can use external style sheets to share CSS among multiple pages. An external style sheet, just another type of text document, can be included on every page. The browser reads this external style sheet just as it would read styles applied within the page itself, and applies those styles accordingly. You add or include an external style sheet with the link element, which goes in the head area of an HTML page. Targeting styles. 129. A typical link element to add CSS looks like this. Link rel equals ocostyle sheetaco type equals oco text slash xoco href equals ocostyle.xoco. Thatacozit. That line includes a file called style.css in the current directory and incorporates it into the page. All the style information and inline styling can be removed in place of that one single line in the head section of the page. Inside the external style sheet are the rules to apply OCO and only the rules to apply. You don't need to include the style attribute or even an opening or closing style element within an external style sheet. Looking back at the example in listing 2 to 1, the external style sheet would contain only this information: div, font weight, bold, span, font style, italic. Now that external style sheet can be shared among multiple HTML files. If you need to make a change to styling, you need to edit only the one CSS file, and it automatically applies the styles to all the pages that use that CSS file. As you can see, external CSS files make maintenance of websites much easier. External style sheets are the recommended method for using CSS, and with only a few exceptions, the remainder of the book uses CSS included from an external style sheet. Targeting styles. Recall the problem identified earlier, where the bold font was applied to all the div elements on the page, when you might not necessarily want to apply it to all those elements. You can fix that problem by targeting or narrowing down the scope of the CSS rule using a more specific selector. CSS uses selectors to determine the element or elements to which a rule will be applied. In the internal style sheet example earlier in this chapter, the selector was the div element, or all div elements on the page. In this section, we tell you how to select specific elements, and groups of elements, so that you can apply CSS styles to them. Targeting styles. Selecting HTML elements. Most any HTML element can be the target of a selector, even things like the body element. In fact, the body element is frequently used as a selector. In order to target page-wide styles, such as what set of fonts to use for the page. You see an example of this in the next section, OC changing fonts OCO. You've already seen examples using HTML elements as selectors. You simply use the element name, with no brackets around it, instead of div. As it would be in HTML, you use div when using it as a CSS selector. Here goes what that looks like. Div. Font weight, bold. As you can see, the name of the element, div, is followed by a brace. This indicates that the rule is beginning within the opening and corresponding closing brace. The property, font weight, is selected, followed by a colon. Smiley face. The value is then set to bold. The line is terminated with a semicolon. Winky face. This semicolon tells the browser that the line is done. In other words, the property/value pair are closed. Multiple properties can be set in the same selector. Taking the preceding example, you could change the font echoes style to be both bold and italic, like this. Div. Font weight, bold. Font style, italic. Each line is ended with a semicolon, and the entire rule is enclosed in opening and closing curly braces. Selecting individual elements. What you've seen so far in this section is that you can target all HTML elements by simply using their names. You've been seeing examples of that throughout the chapter. But what happens when you want to target one, and only one, element on a page? That echoes where the ID selector comes into play. The ID, short for identifier, enables you to select one and only one element within a page. To do so, you need to modify the HTML to add an ID attribute and provide a name for that element. For example, consider an HTML like this. Div Steve Suering/div. Targeting styles. 131. If you want to apply a bold font to that element, you could select all div elements, but that would likely also apply a bold font to other div elements on the page, as you've already seen. Instead, the solution is to add an ID to that particular div, like so. Div ID equals Okamanamiako Steve Suering/div. The IDECO's value is set to my name. Note the case used in this example, with an uppercase N. This case should be matched in the CSS. To select this ID within the CSS, you use a # or hash character, hashtag. Like so. Hashtag my name. With that in mind, making the hashtag my name ID bold looks exactly like the examples you've already seen, just substituting hashtag my name for div. Hashtag my name. Font weight, bold. Always match the case that you use in the HTML with the case that you use in the CSS. If you use all uppercase to name the ID in the HTML, then use all uppercase in the CSS. If you use all lowercase in the HTML, use lowercase in the CSS. If you use a combination, like the example, then match that combination in the CSS. When using IDs in HTML, IDECO's important to realize that the ID should be used once and only once across an entire page. IDECO's fine to use the same ID in different pages, but the ID should appear only once within a page. We can hear your protest now, OC pound, but what if I need to apply the same style to more than one element? OCO that echoes where a CSS class comes in. Selecting a group of elements. You've learned how to target HTML elements across a page, and you've learned how to target just one individual element. A CSS class is used to select multiple elements and apply a style to them. Unlike the selection that occurs when you select all div elements, a CSS class is applied only to the specific elements that you choose. The HTML elements don't even need to be of the same type. You can apply the same CSS class to a div, to an img tag, and to a p element alike. Targeting styles. CSS comments. Within the CSS rule shown nearby, there echoes a comment, / CSS goes here */. Just like in HTML where you can use comments to help explain a certain piece of code, so too can You use comments in CSS to help explain the CSS. Like HTML comments, comments in CSS are not visible in the output of the page, but also like HTML comments, CSS comments are viewable by viewing the source of the HTML or CSS document itself. This means that visitors can see the comments too. Comments in CSS are opened with /* and closed with */. Everything appearing between /* and */ is treated as a comment. Like an ID, a class is applied first to the HTML elements with an attribute. The attribute is the aptly titled class, as in this example. div class equals okabald text echo. This text has a class div. As in the ID example, the class is also case sensitive. The case used in the HTML should match that in the CSS. Whereas an ID selector uses a #, hashtag, in the CSS, a class uses a single period or dot. In the preceding example, where the class is named bold text. In the HTML, it would be referenced like this in the CSS. Bold text. / CSS goes here */. In this example, the class bold text is selected. Classes can be used to solve the problem discovered earlier in Figure 2-4, in the OC pound using an internal style sheet echo section, where the bold font was applied to all the div elements because the CSS used the div selector. You can use a class in the HTML to target only those elements that you want to target. Idaco's time to test that theory. Follow these steps. 1. Open a text editor. 2. Open css.html. Open the file that you created in a previous exercise. You may have named it css2.html. 3. Make changes to css.html to remove the CSS. The page should look like this. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. Link rel equals okastyle sheet echo type equals oko text /xoko href equals okastyle. Xoko. /head. Body. div class equals okabald text echo. This is my web page /div. div. This is the span nicest /span page I oko made yet. /div. div class equals okabald text echo. Here is some text on my page /div. /body. /html. 4. Save the file. You can save it as css.html or rename it to css3.html. Save the file in your document root. 5. Create a new empty text file. Using your text editor, create a new empty file. 6. Place the following CSS in the file. Bold text. Font weight, bold. Span. Font style, italic. 7. Save the file. Save the file as style.css within your document root. Note that you should ensure that the file is named with all lowercase and has the correct file extension, .css. 8. Open your browser and view the css.html file. Type http://localhost/css.html in the browser echo's address bar. If you save the file as css3.html, then use that instead of css.html. The output should look like that in Figure 2-5. Changing fonts. Figure 2-5. A page with an external. Notice that the page in Figure 2-5 looks exactly like Figure 2-3. That echoes what we hoped would happen. This exercise implemented an external style sheet and used a CSS class to target the bold font weight to only those elements that we wanted to be bold. Changing fonts. So far you've seen a good amount of changing font weight to make fonts Appear bold and a little about font styling to make the font appear in italics. However, you can do a lot more with fonts on the web using CSS, including choose a font family and select font sizes and color. Setting the font family. The term font family describes the typeface or look of the font used for the text. The font family can be changed using CSS, but there occurs a huge limitation. The fonts you use need to also be available on the visitor's computer. In practical terms, this means that you have to use certain OC web-friendly eco fonts that appear on most visitors' computers. It also means that you cannot always guarantee what font the visitor will see. If a visitor doesn't have the font that you specify, that visitor's browser chooses a substitute. The CSS property for the font is called font family. When setting a font, the best practice is to provide a list of fonts from which the browser can choose, as in this example. Font family, Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. Changing fonts 135. You can set the recommended fonts for the entire HTML page by using the selector for the body element, as in this example. Body. Font family, Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. Any page that uses that CSS rule will attempt to display its text first with the Arial font. If that font is not available, the Helvetica font is used next. If that font is not available, then a sans serif font is used. If none of those are available, then the browser chooses a font to use all on its own. Common values for font family are Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. OC Arial Blackico, Gadget, sans serif. Georgia, serif. OC Times New Roman Times, serif. A concept called web fonts enables the use of additional fonts by allowing the browser to download the preferred fonts as part of the page. This concept is discussed at www.html5rocks.com/n/tutorial/webfonts. Quick listing 222 shows the CSS that you saw in an earlier example. This listing adds the font family CSS property to the body of the page, meaning that this font family setting will be applied across the entire page. Listing 222, setting the font family value with CSS. Body. Font family, Arial Helvetica sans serif. Bold text. Font weight, bold. Span. Font style, italic. When viewed in a browser using the same HTML from the preceding exercise, the result looks like Figure 2-6. Changing fonts. Figure 2-6. Changing the font family. Setting font size. How large the text appears on a web page is its font size. You can set font sizes using the font size CSS property. Font sizes can be set in one of 4 units. %, %pixels, %points, emicos. Which of those you should use depends largely on whom you ask. If you ask 4 web developers which one to use, you'll probably get 4 different answers. You can read the sidebar for more information, but this book uses either % or emicos. If you're asking why, the short answer is that both of those methods work well for mobile devices and other scenarios where visitors may want to scale the text size according to their needs. Emicos are a unit of sizing for fonts, much like points that you see in a word processor. Font sizes are set like any other CSS property. For example, this sets the font size to 150% of its normal size. Font size, 150%. Changing fonts 137. Choosing a font sizing method. When choosing a font sizing method, you can Use percentage, emicos, points, and pixels. Points and pixels are fixed sizes and some browsers can have trouble resizing them, or more appropriately, the browsers don't allow the visitor to resize the text without using a zoom tool. Percentages and emicos allow resizing. Idicos quite common to set a font size for the entire page and then change font sizes for individual elements in the page. For example, setting the font size for the body element OCO. In other words, the entire page OCO looks like this. Body font size 90%. With that CSS setting, the fonts across all elements on the page would be set to 90% of their default value. You could then change individual areas of the page to have a different font size. Using emicos for the other fonts allows you to change the font sizes relative to that initial setting of 90%. This allows for greater control over the PageOCO's font sizes. Like other CSS settings, visitors can override your CSS with their own settings. They may change the font sizes according to their needs. Listing 2 to 3 shows a CSS file that depicts this functionality. Listing 2 to 3, CSS to change the font size. Body font size, 90%. Span font size, 1.7 em. When combined with the HTML from the previous exercise, you get a page like that in figure 2 to 7. Note the increased font size for the word nicest, thanks to the increased size set with an M. Changing fonts. Figure 2 to 7. Changing font sizes. When using emicos for font sizes, an M value of 1.0 corresponds to 100%. Therefore, 0.9 em would be about 90%, while 1.7 em, as in the example, is essentially 170%. Fonts set with pixels or points use their abbreviations, as in these examples. Font size, 12px. Font size, 12pt. Setting the font color. Just as font sizes can be set, so too can the colors used for fonts. Care should be taken when choosing font colors so as to make the text readable. For example, using white text on a white background makes it impossible for the reader to see the text. Just as there are multiple options for how to change the font size, there are also multiple ways to change the font color. You can use a friendly name for common colors, like red, blue, green, and so on, or you can use a hexadecimal code, or hex code for short. Hex codes are 3 to 6 character codes that correspond to the red, green, and blue, RGB, color mix appropriate to obtain the desired color. Table 2 to 1 shows some common hex codes and their corresponding color. Changing fonts 139. Table 2 to 1. Hex codes for colors. Code. Color. Hashtag FF0000. Red. Hashtag 00FF00. Green. Hashtag 0000FF. Blue. Number 666,666. Dark gray. Hashtag 000000. Black. Hashtag FFFFFF. White. Hashtag FFFF00. Yellow. Hashtag FFA500. Orange. Hex codes are the more accurate and preferred way to set colors in HTML, but they are hard to remember. A tool like Visibonioco's Color Lab at www.visibone.com/colorlab is essential to obtaining the hex code corresponding to the color that you want to use. Font color is set using the color CSS property, as in this example, which is the code for red. Color, hashtag FF0000. Listing 2 to 4 shows CSS to change colors of a span element to blue using a hex code. Listing 2 to 4, coloring a font using CSS. Span. Color, #0000FF. When viewed in a browser with the HTML created earlier in this chapter, the output looks like figure 2 to 8. Note the blue coloring, which may be a bit difficult to read in this black and white book, for the word OC#NISTOCO on the page. Adding borders. Figure 2 to 8. Changing the font color to adding borders. Borders can help provide visual separation between elements on a page. You can add borders around just about anything in HTML, and there are a few border styles to choose from. Borders are added with the border CSS property. When creating a border with CSS, you set 3 things: O_border thickness, O_border style, O_border color. These 3 items are set in a list, separated by a space, as in this example. Border, 1px solid black. In this example, a border would be created and would be 1 pixel thick. The border would be solid and would be black in color. Some common border styles are shown in Table 2 to 2. Adding borders 141. Table 2 to 2. Border styles in CSS. Style. Description. Solid. A solid line. Dotted. A dotted line. Dashed. A line with a dash effect. Double. 2 solid lines. Idako's time for an exercise to create a border around some elements. Follow these steps. 1. Open your text editor. 2. Verify the HTML file from the preceding exercise. The HTML from the preceding exercise is the starting point for this exercise. If yours doesn't look like this, change it to look like this HTML. For those of you who had this file exactly as in the preceding exercise, the only thing you need to do is add a class called addBorder in the first div element. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. Link rel equals ocostyle sheetako type equals oco text /xoko href equals ocostyle. Xoko. /head. Body. Div class equals okabald text addBorder oco. This is my web page /div. Div. This is the span nicest /span page I oco made yet. /div. Div class equals okabald text oco. Here is some text on my page /div. /body. /html. Book 2. Chapter 2. Adding borders. 3. Save the HTML file. Save it as cssborder.html and place it in your document root. 4. Open your CSS file. You should have a CSS file from the preceding exercise. The CSS file from that exercise should contain a class called bold text and a CSS rule changing all span elements to italic. Within your CSS file, add and change your CSS so that it looks like the following. Bold text. Font weight, bold. Span. Font style, italic. Add border. Border, 3px double black. 5. Save the CSS file. Save the file as style.css in your document root. 6. View the page in a browser. Open your web browser and point to http://localhost/css-border.html to view the page. You should see a page like figure 2 to 9. Figure 2 to 9. Adding a border to a. Adding borders 143. You may have noticed in this exercise that you now have 2 classes on the first div in the page. Thatico's a great feature of classes because you can use more than one on an element to combine them. You can experiment with the CSS from this exercise to add different styles of borders to different elements in the page. You may not like how close the text is to the border in figure 2 to 9. We sure don't accord. You can change this with CSS. The CSS padding property changes how close the text will come to the inside edge of the border. For example, you could change the CSS for the add border class to look like this. Add border. Border, 3px double black. Padding, 5px. When you do so, the resulting page will look like that in figure 2 to 10. Figure 2 to 10. Adding. Padding. Within the add border, padding can be added to move the text farther away from its borders. Padding can be applied to any element, regardless of whether it has borders. In order to move that element taco's contents. Changing list styles. When you add padding, the contents of the element move away from all the edges. However, you can also add padding so that the contents move away from the top, bottom, right, or left, or any combination therein. This is accomplished with the padding top, padding bottom, padding right, and padding left properties, respectively. There occurs a shortcut method for setting padding that sees all the padding defined on one line. That shortcut is no cut used here, but you'll see it in other PPEOCO CSS. Where padding moves elements from the inside, there occurs also a property to move or shift elements around from the outside. This element is called margin, and we discuss it later in the chapter when we talk about creating page layouts. Changing list styles. Recall the example from chapter 1 of this mini book that created a bulleted list. That section indicated that you can change or even remove the bullets from the list using CSS. Well, it echoes true. You can. The bullet style for a list is determined by the list style type CSS property. There are numerous values for the list style type property. Table 2 to 3 shows some common ones. Table 2 to 3. Common list styles. Style. Description. Circle. Provides a circle type bullet. Decimal. The default style for OL lists, a simple number. Disk. The default style for OL lists, a filled-in circle style. None. Remove styling completely for the list. Square. A square bullet. Upper Roman. An uppercase Roman numeral, as in an outline. Changing list styles. 145. Changing bullet styles. The best way to see these styles in action is by trying them out. This excerpt uses listing 1 to 7 from the preceding chapter, and we show you all that code here in step 3. 1. Open your text editor. 2. Change or create ul.html. If you have a file called ul.html from the previous chapter, open it now. If you don't, you can create one now by creating a new empty text document. Inside the file, use the following HTML. If you're using ul.html, then you merely need to add the link element to incorporate a CSS file. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title and unordered list / title. Link rel equals oco style sheetco type equals oco text / xoco href equals ocal.xoco. / head. Body. Ul. Lee pine / lee. Lee oak / lee. Lee elm / lee. / ul. / body. / html. 3. Save the file. Save the file as ul.html in your document root. 4. Create a new file. Create a new empty text document using your text editor. 5. Place the following CSS in the new document. Ul. List style type, square. 6. Save the CSS file. Save the file as ul.css in your document root. 7. Open your web browser and view the page. In your web browser, type http://localhost/ul.html into the address bar. And press enter. You should see a page like the one in Figure 2 to 11. Figure 2 to 11. Changing. You can experiment with the list style type property to add or change. Bullet style. Removing bullets. A common look for lists on web pages uses no bullets at all. This effect is created by setting the value of the list style type to none, as in this example, which can be used in the ul.css file you just created. ul. List style type, none. When applied to the page you created in the preceding exercise, the result looks like Figure 2 to 12. You apply the list style type property to the ul or ol and not to the individual list items, the li element. Adding a background 147. Figure 2 to 12. Removing the bullets from an. Adding a background. The pages you've created so far have a white background, or more exactly, they have the default background chosen by the browser. In old versions of web browsers, that background color was gray. You can change the color of the background using CSS, or use a background image. Background colors and background images can be applied to the entire page or to individual elements. Changing background colors on individual elements helps to add highlight and color to certain areas of the page. Changing the background color. The background color of an HTML element is changed with the background color CSS property. The background color uses the same syntax, hex code, as font colors. Refer to the discussion of font colors earlier in this chapter to see hex codes for common colors. Here is an example that changes the background color of the entire page. Body. Background color, #FFFF00. Adding a background. Figure 2 to 13 shows the resulting page. Note that the yellow color won't come through very well in the book, but it goes there. Figure 2 to 13. Adding a yellow background color to a. As previously stated, individual elements can also be changed and you can use all the different CSS selectors to focus that color change to a class, to an individual element, using an ID, or to all elements by using the element name. For example, changing all the div elements to yellow looks like this. Div background color, #FFFF00. You can also use CSS to target elements by their hierarchy. In other words, you can target the elements when they appear as children of other elements. This calls for an example. Many of the examples in this book use HTML, similar to that shown in listing 2 to 5, so we use listing 2 to 5 to show you how to target certain HTML elements. Listing 2 to 5, HTML used in some examples. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title a CSS exercise /title. Link rel equals ocostyle sheetco type equals ocotext /xoko href equals ocostylate.xoko /head. Body. Div class equals ocabald textico. This is my web page /div. Adding a background 149. Div. This is the span nicest /span page IOCO made yet. /div. Div class equals ocabald textico. Here is some text on my page /div. /body. /html. Focus on the span element inside the second div in this HTML. You could say that the span element is a child of the div. Using CSS, you can target this span by its position as a child of the div. This is helpful if you want to apply certain styling to all elements of a certain type but you don't or cannot add a class to those elements. For example, if you wanted to make all span elements that appear within a div to have a red background, you could do so with the CSS div span background color #FF0000. Applying the CSS to the CSS previously seen, including that for figure 2 to 13. You get a result like figure 2 to 14, which, trust us, shows the word nicest. Highlighted in red. Figure 2 to 14. Targeting an element. In order to apply a CSS, this CSS targeting can be applied in any way that you could like, whether thaticos targeting a certain ID, a certain class, or certain elements, like the example does. You can create powerful, and sometimes confusing, combinations of CSS hierarchies in order to apply CSS rules. You can use the CSS targeting to apply any CSS rule, not just background colors. Adding a background image. Background images are a good way to create a nice looking HTML page. Using a background image, you can create a gradient effect, where one part of the page is a solid color and the color fades out or gets lighter as it stretches to the other side. Background images appear behind other elements. This means that you can overlay all your HTML, including other images, on top of a background image. You can find many free images through the Creative Commons. See http://search.creativecommons.org for more information. Be sure to choose an image that still allows for the text to be readable on the page. Black text on a dark picture is not a good match. Background images are added with the background image CSS property, as described here and in the following sections. Background image URL, oc.myimage.jpg. Adding a single background image. One of the features of background images is that you can tile or repeat them within a page. This means that no matter how large the visitor's screen, the background image will always appear. Conversely, you can also choose to not repeat the background image. This section shows how to add a single non-repeating image. In order to complete this exercise, you need an image. The image will preferably be at least 800 pixels by 600 pixels. You can find out the image resolution by right-clicking the image and selecting Properties in Windows, or choosing Get Info from the Finder window on a Mac. 1. Open your text editor. Create a new empty text document in your text editor. 2. In the text editor, enter the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title background image / title. Link rel equals oco style sheetaco type equals oco text / xoco. Ref equals ocoimage style dot xoco. / head. Body. / body. / HTML. 3. Save the file. Save the file as backimage.html in your document root. 4. Create a new text document. Create a new empty text document with your text editor. 5. Place the following CSS in the new document. Be sure to use the name of your image. In this example, we're using an image called largesnow.jpg. The image should be saved within your document root. Body. Background image URL, oc.largesnow.jpg. Background repeat, no repeat. 6. Save the CSS file. Save the file as imagestyle.css and make sure itaco saved within your document root. 7. Open your web browser and view the page. Open your web browser and navigate to the page at http://local host/backimage.html. You'll see the page with a background image. You can see a screenshot of our page, with the large snow.jpg image. In Figure 2 to 15. Figure 2 to 15. A single background image. Adding a background 152. Depending on the size of your image and your screen, you may notice that the image ends, as it does along the right side of Figure 2 to 15. Additionally, you may notice that the image is no-cut centered. Keep reading for a solution. Improving the single background image page. A common approach used to create a better looking page is to add a background color that matches the edges of the image. In the case of our image, the top and bottom are black. Therefore, we could add a rule to the CSS to make the default background color black. This won't have any effect. Where the image is located the image takes precedence but it will matter along the bottom where the image ends. The CSS for this look is as follows. Body. Background image URL, oc_large snow.jpg. Background repeat, no repeat. Background color, #00000. With that rule in place, the image will still end but the appearance won't be quite as shocking or noticeable because it matches the color of the edge of the image, as shown in Figure 2 to 16. Figure 2 to 16. Adding a background color and a background image. Book 2. Chapter 2. Adding style with CSS. Adding a background 153. While the background color trick solves the problem with the edge of the image, it doesn't solve the centering issue. The current background image is applied to the body in other words, the entire page. In order to center the background image, another CSS property needs to be added, as shown in this CSS. Body. Background image URL, oc_large snow.jpg. Background repeat, no repeat. Background color, #00000. Background position, center top. This CSS adds the background position rule and places it at the center, at the top of the page. Other values include left, right, and bottom, and you can combine them so that the background image would appear at the bottom right. For example, the CSS shown here places the image at the center of the page and at the top. This results in the page shown in Figure 2 to 17. Figure 2 to 17. A centered background image on the top with a background color. With that image in place, you can then add any HTML to the page that you see fit. Note, with an image like this, a dark top and light middle, you need to adjust the font colors so that the text is visible on the page. Adding a background 154. Adding a repeating image. You can add an image that repeats. This is a common scenario for web pages because then the image doesn't end along the sides, no matter how large your resolution is. This also alleviates the need for a background position because the background image applies to the entire element. When applied to the entire page, as in the examples shown, you can also forego the background repeat rule and the background color because the image continues throughout the entire page. An ideal repeating image is one that doesn't have noticeable borders, because those borders will show up when the image is tiled or repeated on the page. Figure 2 to 18 shows a small image, 15 pixels x 15 pixels, used as a repeating image with the following CSS. Body. Background image URL, oc_back.jpg. Figure 2 to 18. A repeating background image. As in the example for a single image background, you can now add HTML. Atop the background, again choosing a font color that offsets the image so that visitors can easily read the text. Creating page layouts 155. Creating page layouts. You've now learned a good amount of CSS to change the behavior and appearance of individual items, add background colors, style lists, and so on. All of this leads to creating pages by using CSS. CSS is used to create more complex appearances for web pages than you've seen so far. For example, you can create column effects, where there is a menu on the left or right side and content in the other column, and we tell you how to do that here. When working with alignment and column layouts, it is sometimes helpful to add a border to the element to see where it begins and ends so that you can see how the layout looks. Creating a single column layout. Everything you've seen so far has been a single column layout. There is only one column, aligned on the left of the page. You can, however, control that alignment with CSS. Doing so means creating more complex HTML than you've seen so far, but nothing in the HTML will be new, there'll just be more HTML than before. 1. Open a text editor. Open your text editor and create a new empty document. 2. Within the empty document, enter the following HTML. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title single column / title. Link rel equals OK style sheet echo type equals OK text / xoko href equals OK single. Xoko. / head. Body. divid equals OK container OK. divid equals OK contentico. h2 heriocos some content / h2. P this is where a story would go / p. h2 heriocos more content / h2. P this is another story / p. / div, dash end content dash. / div, dash end container dash. / body. / html. 3. Save the file. 4. Open your browser and view the page. View the page by going to http://localhost/single.html in your browser. You'll see a page similar to that in Figure 2 to 19. Figure 2 to 19. A basic page before. 5. Create a new text document. Create a new empty text document in your text editor. 6. In the document, place the following CSS. Body. Font family, Arial Helvetica sans serif. Hashtag container. Margin, 0 auto. Width, 600 px. Background, hashtag FFFFFF. Hashtag content. Clear, left. Padding, 20 px. 7. Save the CSS file. Save the file as single.css in your document root. 8. Open your web browser. Navigate to http://localhost/single.html in your browser. If your browser is still open, reload the page with Ctrl+R on Windows or Command+R on Mac. You'll see a page like that in Figure 2 to 20. See the paragraphs that follow for more information on what specific modifications you made in Step 6. Creating page layouts 157. Figure 2 to 20. A single column. Later in this chapter, you see how to add a header and footer onto this layout in order to improve its look and functionality. The HTML for this layout uses a div element as a container. The container helps to create the layout and doesn't hold any text content of its own. The CSS for this exercise uses 3 CSS properties that might be new to you: width, margin, and clear. Here shows how they work. Width. sets the horizontal width of an element. In this case, the container is set to 600 pixels wide. No matter how small the browser window is, your HTML will never get smaller than 600 px. Margin, this is the complement to the padding property shown earlier. In this chapter, in the adding border section, the margin property defines the spacing on the outside of the element. In the case shown here, margin 0 auto, the shortcut method is used. See the sidebar for more information. The value $auto means that the browser will choose the value $clear, makes it so that no elements can appear on the side of the element to which the rule applies. In the example, clear left was used on the div with the ID of hashtag content. This means that nothing could appear on the left side of that element. Other values for clear include both oko none oko right oko and inherit.oko. You can experiment with the margins of your browser window to see how the layout created in the exercise reacts or moves along with the browser. The layout created in this section is called a single column fixed width layout. Another option is a single column liquid layout. A liquid layout can work better in certain devices. The fixed width layout shown can sometimes result in a horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the page. To change the layout to a liquid layout, you only need to change a small amount of CSS in the hashtag container, as shown here. Body. Font family, Arial Helvetica Sans serif. Hashtag container. Margin, 030 px. Background, hashtag FFFFFF. Hashtag content. Clear, left. Padding, 20 px. Note the only changes are to remove the width property within the hashtag container and also change the margin from $0 auto to $0 30 px oko width. That, the layout becomes a liquid layout and works better, especially in mobile devices. Shortcuts for margin and padding. Rather than defining a rule for each of the top, bottom, right, and left elements of margin or padding, you can use a shortcut method that defines all of them on one line. For example, margin 0 px 50 px 200 px 300 px is equivalent to this. Margin top 0 px. Margin right 50 px. Margin bottom 200 px. Margin left 300 px. Into a word to remind you how much trouble it is remembering the order. Instead of all four values, you sometimes see 1, 2, or 3 of the values present for margin or padding, as in the example shown earlier. Margin 0 auto. When 4 numbers appear in the rule, the order is top, right, bottom, and left. To help remember the order, use the mnemonic true ble, oko, which takes the first letter of each of the top, right, bottom, left, and makes them. When 2 values are used, the first value corresponds to the top and bottom and the second value corresponds to the right and left. When 3 values are used, the first is the top, the second is the left and right, and the last is the bottom. Finally, when 1 value is used, it applies equally to the top, right, bottom, and left. Creating page layouts 159. Creating a 2-column layout. A 2-column layout uses a bit more HTML to achieve the effect of multiple columns. This is frequently done to add a menu along the side of a page or links to other stories or content. Listing 2 to 6 shows the HTML involved for a 2-column fixed width layout. Listing 2 to 6, A 2-column fixed width layout. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title 2-column/title. Link rel equals OK style sheet echo type equals OK text /xoko href equals OK double dot xoko /head. Body. divid equals OK container OK. divid equals OK may container OK. divid equals OK contentico. h2 hirioko some content /h2. P this is where a story would go /p. h2 hiriokos more content /h2. P this is another story /p. /div dash end content dash. divid equals okasida barako. h3 menu /h3. ul. Li menu item 1 /li. Li menu item 2 /li. Li menu item 3 /li. /ul. /div dash end sidebar dash. /div dash end main container dash. /div dash end container dash. /body. /html. This HTML uses the container div from the single column layout and adds another container div to hold the content. That div, called main container, holds both the content and the sidebar. The other addition is the sidebar itself, aptly titled sidebar. That sidebar holds a menu with an unordered list, ul, in it. The CSS for the 2-column layout is shown in listing 2-7. Listing 2-7, CSS for a 2-column fixed width layout. Hashtag container. Margin, 0 auto. Width, 900 px. Hashtag main container. Float, left. Width, 900 px. Hashtag content. Clear, left. Float, left. Width, 500 px. Padding, 20 px 0. Margin, 00030 px. Display, inline. Hashtag sidebar. Float, right. Width, 260 px. Padding, 20 px 0. Margin, 020 px 00. Display, inline. Background color, hashtag CCCCCC. This CSS uses several of the items that you've seen already, including margin, padding, clear, and background color, among others. New to this CSS are the float and the display properties. The float property defines whether an element will move or float within a layout, either to the left or to the right, or whether it won't float at all, none, as is the default. However, because you want to create 2 columns next to each other, you need to float the content container to the left and the sidebar to the right. Therefore, if you want the sidebar to appear on the right, you simply need to swap float left in the hashtag content CSS with the float right found in the hashtag sidebar CSS. The display property sets how the element should be displayed. Certain elements are known as block level elements and display the entire width of the page. The div element is a good example of this. Because you want to make the columns appear next to each other, you need to change this block display behavior to inline. We introduce inline elements in the preceding chapter, so that the element doesn't extend the full width of the page. 3 frequently used values for the display property are block, to extend the element the full width, inline, to make the element use only its own width for display, and none, which removes the element from display entirely. When viewed in a browser, the layout shown in listings 2-6 and 2-7 produces a page like that in Figure 2-21. Figure 2-21. A 2-column fixed width layout. The layout shown in Figure 2-21 is a fixed width layout. Converting this to a liquid layout means changing the width and margin values in the CSS from pixels, px, to percentages, %. The CSS to convert into a liquid layout is shown in listing 2 to 8. Listing 2 to 8, converting to a 2-column liquid layout. Hashtag container. Margin, 0 auto. Setting the CSS display property to none. Hides an element from a page. When you do so, the element is removed entirely from the page. You can also use another CSS property, visibility, to hide elements. When hiding an element with the visibility property, visibility, hidden, the box or area on the page still remains in place but the element becomes invisible. Making the element visible again, visibility, visible. Shows the element. Hiding elements. 162. Creating page layouts. Width, 100%. Hashtag main container. Float, left. Width, 100%. Hashtag content. Clear, left. Float, left. Width, 65%. Padding, 20px0. Margin, 0.005%. Display, inline. Hashtag sidebar. Float, right. Width, 20%. Padding, 20px0. Margin, 0.2% 00. Display, inline. Background color, hashtag CCCCCC. The changes occur in the hashtag container, hashtag main container, hashtag content, and hashtag sidebar sections, to change the previous values that used pixels to percentages. This layout now changes with the width of the browser, as shown in figure 2 to 22, where you'll notice that the width of the browser is much smaller. Figure 2 to 22. Creating a liquid layout. With 2. Adding headers and footers to a page 163. Adding headers and footers to a page. The layouts you've seen so far provide a good base from which you can build a more complex web page and indeed website. However, the page is missing 2 things, a header and a footer. Headers are typically used to convey information such as the name of the site or to provide a menu. Footers are used to provide additional information, such as copyright, and are also being used to provide a map of links within a site, known as a sitemap. Additionally, we tell you how to create a menu within the header. Creating a header, header menu, and footer. You've seen how to create a multi-column layout with a main content area and a sidebar. To create this layout, you add a div element to hold the sidebar's content. You then apply CSS rules to the div to set its width and position. Creating a header and footer is accomplished in largely the same manner. An additional div is created to hold the content for each, and then rules are applied to those div elements to position them. This being the last example in the chapter, it serves as a capstone exercise. 1. Open your text editor. Create a new blank text document. 2. Enter the following HTML in the text document. Doc type HTML. HTML. Head. Title 2 column with header and footer / title. Link rel equals oco style sheet oco type equals oco text / xoko href equals oco final. Xoko. / head. Body. Div ID equals oco container oco. Div ID equals oco header oco. H1 This is my site, /h1. /div, dash end header dash. Div ID equals oco mean woko. ul. Lia href equals oco hashtag oco home /a/li. Liahref equals oko hashtag oko services slash a slash li. Adding headers and footers to a page. Liahref equals oko hashtag oko about me slash a slash li. Liahref equals oko hashtag oko contact me slash a slash li. Slash ul. Slash div, dash end menu dash. Div id equals oko may container oko. Div id equals oko contentico. H2 hiriokos some content slash h2. P this is where a story would go slash p. H2 hiriokos more content slash h2. P this is another story slash p. Slash div, dash end content dash. Div id equals okasida barako. H3 menu slash h3. Ul. Li menu item 1 slash li. Li menu item 2 slash li. Li menu item 3 slash li. Slash ul. Slash div, dash end sidebar dash. Div id equals okafutaroko. P copyright, C, 2012 Steve Suering slash p. Slash div, dash end footer dash. Slash div, dash end main container dash. Slash div, dash end container dash. Slash body. Slash html. 3 save the file. Save the file as final.html in your document root. 4 create a new text document. Create a new empty text document. This one should hold the following CSS. Body. Font family, Arial Helvetica sans serif. Hashtag container. Margin, 0 auto. Width, 100%. Hashtag header. Background color, hashtag abacab. Padding, 10px. Hashtag menu. Float, left. Width, 100%. Adding headers and footers to a page 165. Background color, hashtag 0c0c0c. Hashtag menu only. List style type, none. Display, inline. Hashtag menu lie. Display, block. Text decoration, none. Border right, 2px solid hashtag ffffff. Padding, 3px 10px. Float, left. Color, hashtag ffffff. Hashtag menu lie hover. Background color, hashtag ccccccc. Hashtag main container. Float, left. Width, 100%. Hashtag content. Clear, left. Float, left. Width, 65%. Padding, 20px0. Margin, 0.005%. Display, inline. Hashtag sidebar. Float, right. Width, 30%. Padding, 20px0. Margin, 0. Display, inline. Background color, hashtag ccccccc. Hashtag footer. Clear, left. Background color, hashtag ccccccc. Text align, center. Padding, 20px. Height, 1%. Book 2. Chapter 2. Adding style with CSS. Adding headers and footers to a page 166. 5. Save the file. Save the CSS file as final.css in your document root. 6. Open your browser and view the page. Open your web browser, navigate to http://localhost/final HTML, and you'll see the page, like the one shown in Figure 2 to 23. Figure 2 to 23. A 2 column liquid layout with a header and footer. Examining the HTML and CSS files. To create this layout, you use a more complex HTML file than you've used. before, but there is no caught anything in that file that you have no caught already seen. Itacos. Just longer in order to create the additional HTML and content for the page. The CSS does use some additional items, specifically to create the menu or links across the top. Note that this is separate from the contextual menu that appears on the right. The menu created for this page appears in the header and provides links to the areas of the site, such as Home, Services, About Me, and Contact Me. The CSS for that section looks like this. Hashtag menu only. List style type, none. Display, inline. Adding headers and footers to a page 167. That section uses a hierarchical structure to target only the li elements within the hashtag menu area. The list style type was set to none, which you saw earlier in the chapter. However, the display was set to inline. When used with lists, it makes the lists flow horizontally rather than vertically, so you get the desired effect here. The next section of CSS changed the behavior of the A elements within that menu and was again targeted using hashtag menu lia so that the CSS rule applied only to those specific A elements. Hashtag menu lia. Display, block. Text decoration, none. Border right, 2px solid hashtag FFFFFF. Padding, 3px 10px. Float, left. Color, hashtag FFFFFF. This CSS rule uses the standard float, display, and border properties explained earlier in this chapter. Added here is a text decoration CSS property, which changes the default behavior of the A link. Rather than being underlined and colored, changing the text decoration to none removes that effect, giving the menu a cleaner look. The final piece of the Menuco CSS is this. Hashtag menu lia hover. Background color, hashtag CCCCCC. This CSS rule targets the hover behavior of the A element. When the visitor hovers over the link, it will change color, in this case to hashtag CCCCCC, which is a shade of gray.